It began with the stench. Not smoke, at least not at first. It was something stranger, sweeter, almost like caramelized meat left too long in a copper pan. Thick, metallic. It drifted through the bare branches of Wexley Heath in the first hours of dawn, curling between frost-bitten hedgerows and over the moss-choked stones of the chapel graveyard. A cart horse, nervy from the scent, kicked its hooves against the frozen ruts of the main road. Its driver, old Jonah Petter, leaned forward with a furrowed brow, his gloved hand raised to his nose. "Christ's mercy," he muttered. "Something's gone foul." The frost beneath his boots snapped like brittle glass as he climbed down. The clinic loomed 50 yards ahead, half shrouded in the freezing mist, its brick chimney exhaling a strange, pale smoke that didn't rise but sank like grief. Officially named the Wexley Institution for Therapeutic Studies, most locals called it the Red House. A private medical retreat for wealthy patients with nervous ailments, it had stood on the edge of the village since 1839. High stone walls, frosted glass windows, no patients allowed outside after dusk. Few knew what happened inside, and fewer cared to ask. Petter knew better than to poke his nose in. But this smell wasn't manure, nor burnt coal. It was wrong. It was human. He pushed open the rust-bitten gate. The front garden, once manicured, now lay withered and pale, its hedges blackened as if frostbitten from inside. The brass bell by the door hung crooked, a thin line of soot clinging to the brick above. He knocked once. No answer. Again. Harder. "Dr. Wexley." "Ma'am Tertia." Still nothing. Then, movement. The door creaked an inch open by itself. Petter hesitated. His fingers trembled as he pushed it further. Inside, the clinic's main hall was unusually quiet. The lamps were off. The tiled floor bore wet footprints. Petter's breath hung thick in the cold air as he stepped forward, boots crunching on something soft. Hair. It was hair. A clump, scorched at the edges, the blonde turned char-black in places. He backed away. And then he saw them. Two forms slumped by the stairs. One face down, one curled against the wall, as if hiding from something still coming. Both naked, both charred. One's fingers were blackened claws. The other's back had blistered open like scorched parchment. But their expressions, God help him, their mouths were agape, frozen in silent screams, as though the air had been sucked from their lungs mid-cry. Petter staggered backward, vomiting into the brass umbrella stand. The clinic had burned, but the walls were untouched. No signs of flame on the wood, no ash on the ceiling, no broken oil lamps. Just bodies. Human bodies. Roasted. He ran. That afternoon the magistrate arrived. Mr. Elias Morven, a wiry man with a limp and a face pinched by years of rural complaints, stepped down from his carriage with a handkerchief already pressed to his nose.
"You'll say what you saw," he instructed Petter curtly. "Nothing more." Word had already rippled through Wexley by then. The Red House was sealed by twilight. 2 constables posted outside while the chimney continued to cough its pallid smoke. The official notice, printed in the Wexley Herald 2 days later, read, "Due to an unfortunate malfunction in the heating system of the Wexley Institution, 3 patients and 1 staff member succumbed to burns. A full investigation is underway. There is no cause for community concern." But by then, the villagers had already drawn their own conclusions. It wasn't a fire, it was a punishment. Beyond the official accounts, a single page from that day survives, preserved in the margins of a torn visitor log retrieved years later from a locked cabinet. The ink is faded, but legible. January 14, 1858. They screamed for 20 minutes. The walls held cold. No smoke marks. Just heat. Heat like judgment. I cannot explain it. Tertia's eyes boiled in their sockets. Yet the paintings on the wall were untouched. No signature. Only initials. MG. On the outskirts of Wexley, the chimney still stands. It hasn't smoked in decades. But every January, on the 14th day, those who pass by the overgrown gates swear they smell it again. Sweet, charred, and unmistakably human. Wexley had always been a village of locked windows and soft gossip. Not the biting, giddy kind found in market towns, but the kind passed in tight circles at the back of the vestry, or murmured between steeple sweeps and milkmen before dawn. A place where silence was a sign of respect and fear. So, when the notice appeared in the Wexley Herald that cold January morning, thinly stating that a heating malfunction had caused the unfortunate deaths of several residents at the Red House, it stirred a strange and awkward response. Many nodded and said nothing. The paper, dated 17 January 1858, ran no photographs, only a small engraving of the clinic's facade. But it was the name that caught attention. Dr. Algernon Wexley, long believed to be the retired founder, was listed among the deceased. For years, no one had seen him. Some swore he'd gone to Switzerland. Others whispered he never left the basement. At Mrs. Vey's bakery, flour-dusted hands passed buns and speculation. "I heard they were found cooked like geese," said one woman, leaning in, voice hushed. All four, and not a mark on the building. Just bodies, like they'd been seared from inside. "Nonsense," replied a man with cracked fingernails and an oil-smudged cap. "It's that new stove they put in. They said it ran on gas. Gas can leak, explode. You seen what it did in Hull last year." "But why only them?" piped a younger girl by the window. "Why not the rest?" "And what about the children? Weren't there 2 sent in last autumn from Bishopsgate?" The room quieted. No one had seen the children leave. 3 houses down, in the parlour of Reverend Castling, a different sort of conversation took place. Reverend Castling, recently returned from a sabbatical in Derby, was thin, pale, and known for his unwavering sermons on moral purity. His wife, Matilda, pressed him for truth. "You performed the confirmations, Edward. You went into that place." Castling didn't answer at first. He stirred his tea 4 times clockwise, then set the spoon down with a metallic clink. "There was a girl," he said. 12. Couldn't speak above a whisper. She had scars down her spine in perfect symmetry. Not burns, not whip marks. Like incisions, Matilda went pale. She said they made her dream while she was awake. The town constable, Mr. Darley, took to walking slower outside the clinic walls. It was said he'd gone in with Magistrate Morven the day of the discovery. Since then, he'd kept a notebook in his pocket, though no one had ever seen him write in it. One morning, young Timmy Carraway watched as Darley stood facing the sealed gate, then pulled a small object from his coat, a brass pocket watch. The boy claimed the watch ticked backwards. No one believed him. Until he described the engraving inside, a V, 1841. Dr. Algernon Wexley's initials, the year the clinic was founded. Back at Granger's pub, where whiskey was poured heavier in winter, a merchant named Paul Hartridge had a different story. "I delivered there twice a month, clean linens, medicines, salt." He took a long sip of something brown and bitter. "Last time I went, 'twas 2 days before the burning, Miss Tertia met me at the gate. Wouldn't let me in." "Why?" someone asked. "Said there was a procedure ongoing. Said the patients couldn't be disturbed. Thing is, I heard singing, but not hymns. It sounded wrong, fast, in another tongue. Latin?" He nodded. "Or worse." On the 19th of January, a brief follow-up appeared in the Herald. "Due to the fragile nature of patient confidentiality, no further details shall be released regarding the tragic incident at Wexley Clinic. Officials assure the public that no criminal activity is suspected." It was signed by A. Klemper, secretary to the medical superintendent for Northshire. But no one in Wexley had ever heard of a Mr. Klemper, and the medical superintendent for Northshire had, in fact, died the year before. Obituary records confirmed it. Among the whispers, one voice spoke louder, though only once. Mrs. Emmeline Harrow, aged 74, had lived opposite the clinic since her marriage in 1809. Her window faced the rear of the Red House, including the garden wall and what she called the furnace tower. In an account preserved in the Wexley Town Historical Society's 1896 oral log, Mrs. Harrow is quoted saying, "They were taken there after dark, I saw it more than once. Wheelchairs pushed in silence, some walking, some not. And there was a boy who limped. I watched him go in, but I never saw him come out. When asked why she never reported it, she replied, "Because the chimney smoked white only once a month, and that meant they'd done it again. But when it smoked grey, like it did that day, then they'd made a mistake." Not all were content with rumours. Mr. Samuel Braith, a retired schoolmaster known for keeping ledgers of local property records, filed a letter with the county's archive registrar. He requested access to the clinic's founding charter and early patient logs. He received a single document in return: a copy of the institution's founding trust, dated 4th August 1839, which stated, "This institution shall operate for the purposes of healing those afflicted with disorders of the spirit and nerves through methods experimental, physical and purgative, under the sole discretion of the attending physician, Dr." A vexillly in the margin, scribbled in faint pencil. Approved, March 1842, modified 1846. Heating expansion, added 1857. No blueprints for the heating expansion survive, no invoices for new furnaces, no correspondence with architects. Yet everyone agreed. Something had changed last year. The chimney had smoked more often. The screams had grown shorter. And then finally, too short to hear at all. In spring, a thin booklet appeared in 2 London bookstores before being pulled from shelves. It was titled, "An Account of Controlled Human Thermogenesis in Isolated Settings." No author, no publisher, only one paragraph remains quoted in a medical ethics pamphlet from 1902. There is an edge between sensation and combustion, a point at which the nerves transmit both pleasure and pain simultaneously. That edge, properly maintained, opens the mind to higher perception. The body must be coaxed, not destroyed. By summer, few in Wexley spoke of the clinic. The garden grew wild. Children dared each other to touch the blackened gate. And on Sundays, Reverend Castling added one line to his benediction: "May all fires remain in their hearths, and not in the hearts of men." Dr. Algernon Vexley was not born in Wexley. He arrived in 1838 on a mail coach from Birmingham, carrying little more than a sealed trunk, a physician's license bearing the royal seal, and a recommendation letter from Dr. Everett Romilly of the Warwick Asylum for the Diseased Mind, a man later disgraced for his involvement in unregulated vivisections. Locals said Vexley was strange from the start. He wore gloves in all seasons, spoke in complete sentences with no wasted words, and walked with the precision of a man measuring time. But it wasn't his manner that unsettled. It was his eyes. Steel grey and unblinking, they gave the impression not of cruelty, but of indifference, as though he observed people in the same way one might study smoke behind glass. When he purchased the brick estate on the edge of Wexley in March of 1839, he named it the Institution of Therapeutic Advancement. The townspeople, more familiar with naming things, after saints and grocers, dubbed it simply the Red House. He never married, but he was not alone. Records from the 1841 Northshire census list a total of 5 permanent residents at the Red House: Dr. Algernon Vexley, 38, occupation, physician Miss Tertia Greaves, 26, occupation, matron Lydia, 9, ward. Ernest, 6, ward, servant, unnamed, age 40s, occupation, cook. The 2 wards, Lydia and Ernest, were never seen in Wexley's small schoolhouse. When asked about them, Vexley would reply simply, "They are under private instruction." Their minds are delicate. Their surnames were never recorded, nor were their origins. No baptismal records exist, and no death notices were ever filed. In 1851, according to surviving property ledgers, Vexley ordered a full cellar excavation, some say to install a new heating mechanism. The contractor, Mr. Fenwick Rawls, recorded the transaction in his ledger. A torn scrap remains in the Northshire Builders' Archives, which reads, "Stone floor lifted, sub-basement exposed, no natural foundation, deep clay. He gave orders not to seal it, paid in coin, no receipts, told not to return." 1 week later, Rawls left Wexley and never returned. There was one figure, however, who had known Vexley before the Red House. Ms. Adelaide Moorcroft, a spinster and amateur illustrator from Staffordshire, kept a travel diary now preserved in the Whitby Archives of Unusual Records. Among pages describing insects and Latin poetry, a short entry from July 1835 is marked with a black-inked border. Attended a demonstration at Warwick Institute this morning. Dr. Romley spoke on the intersection of temperature and trauma. A young assistant, Vexley, watched silently from the upper gallery, sketching diagrams no one else could see. They whispered of thermal awakenings and mapping pain. Disturbing. I will not return. Accompanying the entry is a rough ink drawing of a man with gloved hands, holding a small clockwork device over a figure strapped to a chair. Below it, in red pencil, his eyes never blinked. But if Vexley was the brain, then Tertia Greaves was the blood. Born in 1815 in a tenement near Leeds, her baptismal record indicates she was the daughter of a chimney sweep and a kitchen maid. By 1830, she was listed as an assistant nurse in the St. Mark's Infirmary for the Poor. Then, curiously, she vanishes from all known records until 1839, where she reappears as the registered matron of the Red House. Witnesses described her as calm but curt. She wore no jewelry, kept her hair in a tight bun, and addressed patients by number rather than name. Yet it was said she never flinched. Not at seizures, not at screams, not even at burns. A former apothecary's apprentice, Nathaniel Crooms, who worked 1 month at the Red House in 1853 before resigning, once said, "It was her voice that chilled you. Not cruel, just flat, as if she was dictating minutes at a parish meeting, even when someone bled in front of her." When asked what she called the patients, he answered, "Subjects." She called them subjects, but the most haunting piece of evidence comes not from testimony, but from the ash. In 1891, a local archaeologist named Walter Brinley conducted an informal dig in the ruins of the Red House garden after portions of the estate were set to be cleared for farmland. Among the items he unearthed was a scorched notebook wrapped in oilcloth, preserved beneath a stone basin behind the overgrown hedges. Though most pages were unreadable, one fragment remained legible. Test 21. Lydia's heart rate remains low under exposure. Her hair chars before skin reacts. Tertia notes she no longer dreams when cooled. The balance must be found. We proceed tonight with the copper frame, signed A.V. Who was Lydia? Who was Ernest? Some theorize they were Vexley's own children, born out of wedlock to an unknown woman. Others suggest they were orphans taken for study. But the most disturbing theory appeared in an unsigned letter sent anonymously to the Northshire Review in 1884 and never published. They were not born. They were preserved. Tertia spoke of them as beginnings. I saw the tanks once. There were more than 2. The letter bore no return address, only the initials, GB. From a purely bureaucratic standpoint, Vexley's record remains unblemished. The Royal College of Physicians lists him as a certified member through 1857. His final official communication is dated November 12, 1857, in which he requests additional mercury thermometers and thinner gauze for experimentation on thermal modulation thresholds. It was signed in his usual hand, 2 months before the fire. To this day, no grave has ever been found for Dr. Algernon Vexley, or for Tertia Greaves, or for the children. When the clinic was officially condemned in 1864, only 2 headstones were added to the nearby parish cemetery. One marked Unknown Subject 4, Female, Adult, found in hallway. The other, Subject 7, Male, approximate, age 12, found near furnace. Neither bore real names, but behind the second marker, someone etched faintly into the stone, he burned with his eyes open. The first public incident took place on October 3, 1857, 3 months before the fire. It was market day in Wexley. Rain had softened the cobblestones, and the air carried the smell of wet wool, coal soot, and turned earth. Around noon, Several townsfolk congregated near the old school bell tower to observe a peculiar scene. A woman in a pale blue patient gown, barefoot and shaking, walking silently through the square. She did not appear lost. She moved with slow purpose, head tilted, arms limp at her sides, as if listening to something beneath the stones. Her name was Miriam Howarth, a patient known only by name to the townspeople, seen occasionally through the barred upper windows of the Red House. That day, however, she was alone, and she was whispering. Witnesses described her words as fragmented, rhythmic, a kind of chant, not English, not Latin. Her skin was flushed deep red, as if scalded, but without blister or burn. Her lips were cracked, and her eyes did not blink once in the 20 minutes she was observed before collapsing at the foot of the grocer's steps. She was carried to Mrs. Greven's apothecary, where she lay unconscious for 4 hours. When she woke, she asked for the mirror with the screaming frame. She died that night, quietly, with no apparent cause. Her death certificate, signed by Dr. Abner Clem, a visiting physician from Newcastle, listed systemic failure due to unknown origin. 4 days later, at the Wexley Chapel, a candle exploded during evening vespers. No flame, no oil, just a sudden bloom of heat that cracked the brass casing and burned a perfect ring into the choir loft rail, a ring measuring precisely 11 inches in diameter. The congregation fled. A church warden later stated, "There was no smoke, just heat, a heat that made your teeth throb." The floor beneath the ring was tested for gas seepage by local masons. They found nothing. By late October, 3 separate families, none of whom had any known connection to the clinic, reported a strange phenomenon in their homes: mirrors fogging from the inside during the night. Mrs. Henley, whose son had delivered firewood to the Red House the previous week, claimed her wardrobe mirror wept for 2 days, leaving thin streaks along the frame that couldn't be wiped clean. On October 21st, she awoke to find her son standing in front of it, barefoot, whispering words in a hoarse tone he could not remember speaking. He was sent to live with his uncle in Lichfield. He never spoke again. Then, on November 7th, came the incident of Eli Porth. Eli was a tanner by trade, large and practical. He dismissed talk of the clinic as nonsense. He believed in what could be seen, smelled and skinned. Until the day he was found on the edge of the canal. His boots were off. His shirt burned from the collar to the sleeves, but his skin was untouched. He held a dead crow in his hands. Both his palms were blistered. He claimed he had seen a man glowing inside his own ribs. When questioned, he simply repeated, "They're boiling the soul from the body." And it doesn't scream, it sings. He was admitted to the asylum in Derby on November 10th. He died 2 weeks later, of spontaneous cardiac failure. These events might have remained scattered curiosities, if not for the letter. On December 2nd, 1857, Reverend Castling received an envelope with no return address, left at the church gate wrapped in oilcloth, and sealed with a red wax insignia, a stylized furnace grate surrounded by a serpent. Inside, a single page. To invert the flame is to uncover what lies beneath the nerves. The skin is not the body's wall, it is the cage. We have only begun to open it properly. Soon we shall find the note that vibrates the blood to harmony. Soon the breath will ignite without smoke signed V. The Reverend, after reading the letter, collapsed during that Sunday's sermon. He was carried from the pulpit, raving about heat that thinks and blood that sings. He was confined to his home for several weeks, though no doctor could diagnose his state as madness or fever. When interviewed later by the magistrate, he claimed, "The devil does not burn." The devil teaches us how the local paper made no mention of these events. But a private investigator from London, Mr. Baron Heist, arrived in Wexley in early December, citing concerns of improper experimentation under the guise of medical research. He carried a black case and a silver signet ring, and he introduced himself as being in service to the Crown's interest in medical ethics. He visited the Red House. He entered. He did not leave for 3 days. When he finally exited, he was pale, his coat torn at the collar, and his left boot missing. He said nothing to anyone. He boarded the next train to York and never returned. 3 months later, his obituary ran in a London medical journal. Mr. B. heist, fatal self-immolation in his study, cause unknown. Finally, on December 30th, 1857, a girl was heard screaming near the garden wall of the Red House just before dawn. A milkman, Thomas Pell, said the sound rose like steam from the ground itself. He claimed the gate had glowed faintly for 10 minutes after. That night, every fire in Wexley went out. Every hearth, every lantern, every oil lamp. The entire village remained in cold darkness for 7 hours. At 3:03 a.m., the first flame reappeared, at the Red House chimney. Grey smoke, no sparks, no light, just heat. In the weeks leading up to the fire, no further incidents were reported. Just quiet, an unnatural calm. Even the children stopped whispering in the street. And yet, anyone who walked within 20 paces of the Red House swore the frost melted from the ground. Birds refused to perch on the iron fence. Dogs howled only once, when passing the gate. One was found dead near the boundary stone. Its fur is singed, its eyes boiled, and its paws curled as if grasping something invisible. In the final weeks before the fire, Wexley began to change. It started subtly. Shops closed earlier. The town bell rang twice instead of once at dusk. Mothers no longer sent children alone to fetch water after sundown, and even the butcher, Mr. Collenwright, a man once arrested for fighting constables in his youth, kept a lantern lit on his stoop all night. And though no law was passed, a curfew settled over the village like a fog, not of governance, but of dread. January 3rd, 1858, a full 11 days before the incident. A woman named Elspeth Doring, aged 47, was found at the rear boundary wall of the Red House, curled on her side in the frost. Her shawl was soaked through, but there were no signs of exposure. Her eyes were open, mouth agape. A doctor from Middlesbrough, visiting family for the new year, performed an informal examination. He recorded one detail that survives in his notebook, now archived at the Northshire Medical College. She had no burns, no bruising. And yet, her internal temperature was elevated to a fatal degree. Brain tissue showed signs of thermal coagulation as if baked. Her skin remained cold to the touch. The next day, a chimney sweep's apprentice, Benjamin Benji Rowe, aged 12, vanished. He had been assigned to clean the flue of the abandoned tailor's shop on East Gorse Lane. The owner, Mr. Rutherwyke, swore he'd spoken to the boy around 8:45 a.m., just as the fog was lifting. The chimney was still warm, but Benji was never seen again. That evening, his soot bucket was found behind the Red House wall, contorted, handle melted. A single fingerprint remained on the metal. It was his. But the print was burned in, not on. By January 6th, the fear had names. Some called it the Red Fever. Others whispered of smoke spirits or the quiet fire. Constable Darley, who had grown increasingly gaunt in the weeks following the incident, began pacing the southern path near the clinic for hours, even in the bitter sleet. His wife, interviewed decades later, recalled, "He stopped eating meat, said it was too warm, slept with the windows open, said he could still hear it in the pipes." Darley's final journal entry, dated January 9th, reads, "It isn't heat. It's something older, something that used heat like a key. I think the clinic didn't invent it. I think they let it in." 2 days later, Darley attempted to hang himself in the chapel belfry. He survived, but never spoke again. Amid the rising tension, one figure refused to be silent. Magistrate Elias Morvan, ever the rationalist, called for an inquiry. He penned a formal request to the Northshire County Medical Review Board, demanding access to all patient logs, equipment orders, and heating installations filed by the Red House. On January 11th, a courier arrived with a single parcel, a bound volume of furnace blueprints and anatomical diagrams stamped with the clinic's wax seal. The pages were unsigned. The diagrams bore no human features, but instead abstract forms. Loops of arteries reshaped into spirals, lungs stretched into bellows, veins marked with notations in alchemical shorthand. One diagram, still preserved in Wexley's Town Hall archives, shows a full human figure dissected by intersecting rings labelled sympathetic ignition points. At the bottom, the phrase, "All life is latent fire. The body is only the wick." That same night, a candle exploded in the vestry once again. No fire spread, just sound. A deep, almost musical crack. 3 witnesses described the exact same thing. A pressure in their bones, as if their skeletons had been briefly pulled toward the church wall. One fainted. One vomited. Blood. One began to cry in reverse, tears retreating from his cheeks back into his eyes. By now, the town was on the brink. Reverend Castling returned to his pulpit on January 12th, pale and trembling, and announced that the All Saints baptismal service scheduled for the week ahead was to be postponed. "I fear," he said, "that the water will no longer obey." That same day, a final witness emerged. Miss Marianne Calder, a former laundress for the clinic who had moved to Durham after her abrupt dismissal in 1856, returned to Wexley with a bundle of letters and a badly folded blueprint. She had kept them hidden for 2 years, too frightened to speak. Her statement, now part of the town's sealed records, included the following. Dr. Wexley believed that death was not a moment, but a door. He said the body was like a clock that could be reversed, but it required flame. Not open flame, but the inside kind. The slow heat that speaks to marrow. He called it harmonics. Said pain was only the sound of flesh tuning itself. She showed authorities a small glass vial, stoppered in wax. Inside, a curled sliver of human skin, paper-thin, grey, not charred, but calcified, stamped on the wax, a V. She was taken to Derby for questioning. She never made it. Her coach overturned on the icy road near Ravenmere Hill. The horses were unharmed, but her body was found boiled within her winter coat. The coach itself was unburned. By January 13th, families began to flee. 5 carts left that morning for York. Others departed on foot. The Herald ran no new notices. The paper mill reported no orders for the week. The village, once bustling with chatter, fell to silence. Even the birds abandoned the hedges. And by midnight, the frost did not return. The earth itself remained warm, as if exhaling. January 14th, 1858, the day of the fire. It did not begin with smoke. It began with a sound. According to multiple statements gathered later, 5 in total, it began at 4:47 a.m. with a low pulsing hum. Not a note exactly, but a frequency. A vibration so low it rattled panes without breaking them. Old Jonah Petter said it shook his molars. Mrs. Henley claimed her cat screamed, then dropped dead. The red house windows glowed, not with light but with heat, heat that left no glare, only distortion, like the air above a furnace. The chimney began to pull in smoke, not exhale, and then came the scream, one, long, inhuman, followed by silence, and then charred silence. There is a tendency in such cases for memory to smudge. Facts bend, names twist, distances shrink. A town forgets, slowly, the truths it once whispered in certainty. But in Wexley, certain documents refused to vanish. And though most official records of the Red House were removed from county registries by 1862, a handful of surviving artifacts, discovered in locked drawers, personal Bibles, and forgotten trunks, hinted at a deeper, older purpose. The first came from the ruins themselves. In 1881, during the levelling of the Red House foundations to build a livestock barn that never opened, labourers uncovered a sealed brick arch beneath the furnace chamber. It was hidden behind false masonry. Inside, a cylindrical iron canister wrapped in wax cloth and stamped twice with the letters MG. When opened, the canister revealed a priest's confession. Excerpts from the confession of Brother Matthias Goren, dated June 4th, 1837. They say we are to anoint with holy oil, but the man brought no oil. He brought copper coils and maps of the spine. He calls them thresholds of flame. He says pain is the body resisting illumination. I watched them place the girl into the chamber. She did not scream, but her eyes turned white. He measured her breath, not her pulse. When we prayed, he told us to stop. He said, God is not listening. But something older might be. I fear we did not bless the house. I fear we sealed it with something that waits to be fed. This confession predates the founding of the Wexley Clinic by nearly 2 years. Further evidence emerged in 1897 when historian Ellis Farley, researching early medical ethics violations in Northshire, came across an annotated 1846 surgical manual misfiled in the archives of the Royal Society in London. The binding bore no title, only the symbol of a spiral within a square, a marking later matched to the border etched onto the scorched mirror frame recovered from the clinic. Inside the manual, one page was bookmarked with brittle wax paper. Its heading read, "On the extraction of nervous flame via controlled inversion of body temperature." Beneath it, an illustration of a human figure positioned inside a coil of pipe resembling a helix. Labels included primary conductor, base of spine, coccygeal gate. Modulator nodes, scapulae, sternum, tongue root. Final containment, ocular basin or cardiac hollow. Scrawled in the margin, never exceed 51.7 degrees Celsius internal. Beyond that, the vessel sings a second artifact came to light in 1903, hidden within the false base of a family Bible donated by the late Reverend Castling's widow. Inside the hollow, a folded map and a yellowed letter addressed to E. The letter bore no date, but its ink was of the reddish iron gall type popular in the 1840s. To initiate heat is simple. To command it, less so. The resonance varies from patient to patient. Only those born at the thinnest hours may endure the tuning. The others rupture too soon. We believe the marrow holds the code, not the brain. The brain only translates. The marrow remembers, if the next trials are successful, I shall approach the bishop again. We will need permission to expand the lower chamber. Signed, A. Wexley. Perhaps the most unnerving record, however, was not found by historians at all, but by accident. In 1946, after the war, a family displaced by bombings was temporarily housed in an abandoned farmhouse on the edge of Old Wexley. The eldest son, aged 14, began exploring the outbuildings. In a rotting trunk beneath a hayloft, he discovered a child-sized straitjacket, charred at the sleeves, but otherwise intact. Stuffed inside its lining was a torn page from a children's reading primer. The only words legible: L is for light. L is for listen. L is for Lydia, the girl from the 1841 census, one of the unnamed wards of the Red House. Her name had not been spoken in Wexley in over 90 years. And then there was the ledger. Recovered by a salvage crew in 1923 from a flooded storage room beneath the now collapsing clinic foundation, the subject index ledger was a slim, leather-bound book, its pages waterlogged but salvageable. Each patient had only a number, no name. Each entry included age admittance, date condition, severity 1 to 5, thermal threshold, result entry 0047 is of note, age 12, admittance March 1856, severity 4 threshold 47.2 degrees Celsius, result failed containment, vocal cords charred post-mortem, frame removed, residue ignited spontaneously 12 hours later, subject marked incomplete, retest denied. The next page is missing. No death records were filed for subject 0047. But a faded newspaper clipping from the Northshire Guardian, April 1856, reported a small house fire near Barrowfell. The article ends with an unexplained note. A faint singing was reported by neighbours in the hours before the flames were noticed. The song was in no language known to the family. The final clue, a fragment many consider apocryphal, came not from a document, but from an engraving. A stone slab unearthed during electrical trenching in 1971 buried 10 feet beneath the southern field of the clinic grounds, etched into its surface in Latin, ex corporibus templum fit. Translation: from bodies a temple is made. Below it, a circle of 13 dots surrounding a flame. 4 of the dots were deeper, punched in, as if the others were waiting. For those who continue to study the Wexley Clinic, the clues form a shape, not a story, a ritual, a process, one that did not begin with Wexley and, some fear, did not end with the fire, because the ledger ends with a note scribbled in rushed ink across the inside back cover. A note that has never been explained. Subject 73 transferred. Location: Barrowfell Sanitarium. Status: dormant, awaiting ignition conditions. There is no record of a Subject 73. No known patient lists from Barrowfell Sanitarium in 1858, and Barrowfell burned down in 1899, during winter, with no survivors. The final event was not a fire in the traditional sense. It was January 14th, 1858, a Thursday. Cold, still, heavy with frost. By 4:30 a.m., the streets of Wexley lay silent under a thin veil of hoarfrost, coating every window latch and church steeple. The only signs of life were in the flickers of candlelight from those few households that still kept vigil. Then, at 4:47 a.m., came the sound. Witnesses later described it not
as a blast or cry, but as a pressure, a sensation deep in the teeth and bones, like standing beside a great organ that had struck a note no ear could register. Mr. Timothy Pell, the milkman, claimed his milk curdled instantly. Mrs. Elspeth Crowthorne, who had just risen to stoke her stove, found her fire turn blue before it extinguished entirely. Others said nothing at all, just that they felt their insides twist slightly, as if their stomachs had flinched from something about to arrive. And then the Red House screamed, not metaphorically. The structure itself made a sound, not from the people inside, from the building. At 5:01 a.m., a constable on watch noted a strange change in the chimney's behaviour. Rather than emitting smoke, it had begun inhaling it, pulling it in with rhythmic surges, like a pair of lungs struggling to remember how to breathe. The chimney pulsed with warmth, yet the air outside remained bitter. The clinic's windows steamed from within, but not with condensation. They bulged, some warping outward, as though pressure was building, not from combustion, but from something else. The front door cracked open by itself. The latch had not been broken. The hinges were cold. At 5:17 a.m., the first visible flash was recorded. A white arc of heat, silent, seamless, spread across the third-floor window. According to later sketches made by archivist Helena Reeves, the light curved in a perfect spiral, beginning from the chest of a figure briefly visible behind the glass. She described the figure as neither man nor woman, hairless, upright, arms lifted. Its skin glowed like smelted ore. But its eyes were what drew me. Not fear, not pain, recognition, like it knew we were watching and was showing us what came next. The window shattered outward, but the glass did not fall. It hovered. For nearly 5 full seconds, each shard remained suspended in the air. Then, gravity resumed. They fell like cold rain. By 5:20 a.m., witnesses from the southern fields observed a shift in the weather above the house. Clouds churned inward over the estate, forming a vortex, though no wind stirred the trees around it. A single arc of lightning struck the weather vane atop the Red House. But there was no thunder. At that exact moment, Magistrate Morven, standing inside the town hall, dropped dead. His pocket watch, retrieved from his body, had melted to his ribs. Its hands were stopped at 5:20 a.m. sharp. Within the Red House, something moved. Years later, in 1913, when an archivist named Clarence Halberd discovered a scorched phonograph cylinder sealed in a lead-lined drawer beneath Wexley's collapsed town archives, he found a recording of that morning. The label simply read, 14 January, Subject 73. Though warped and fragmented,
5 minutes of audio were eventually restored by the British Museum's Sound Preservation Society in 1987. What it captured was not music nor voice, but a pulsing rhythm, a sound pattern that matched no natural or mechanical frequency. Oscillating between 47 Hz and 62 Hz, the pattern repeated 13 times before collapsing into static. Acoustic engineers later noted that the final 3 pulses seemed to harmonize with human breathing patterns, as if mimicking respiration, not of the listener, but of something over the listener. A low whisper was heard faintly underneath the pulse. "We found the gate, and heat is the key." At 5:31 a.m., the clinic collapsed inward, not from combustion, from suction. The walls imploded, stone folding into stone, glass drawn downward, wood groaning as though pulled into a drain beneath the earth. But no crater was left behind. Only a smooth depression, roughly circular, 12 feet in diameter, slightly warm to the touch. The bricks were never found. The bodies never recovered. The chimney still stood, cracked, blackened, still warm. But one item remained. At 6:04 a.m., as dawn broke over the ash-laced field, Constable Rayner found a small tin box at the base of the fence, unburned. Inside, a wax cylinder, a ledger page, and a single tooth, human, calcined, etched with the letter L. The ledger, dated 13 January 1858, bore the heading, "Final harmonic induction, confirmation required." Underneath, subject, Lydia Threshold, 51.7 degrees Celsius. Vocalization, present resonance. Stability, achieve status, complete note. She did not scream. She sang. The wax cylinder bore no groove, only a symbol etched into the edge, a spiral within a square, flanked by 2 mirrored eyes. By noon that day, the town's well ran dry. The ground, once saturated from winter frost, had hardened. A kind of brittle heat lingered below the surface for weeks, cracking stones from the inside out. No explanation was ever offered by regional authorities. The area was declared unstable and fenced. But the grass returned, the flowers bloomed, and Wexley tried, as best it could, to forget. Yet every January 14th, before dawn, if one walks within 20 feet of where the Red House once stood, the air is still, thick, tasting faintly of copper. And sometimes, only sometimes, if the frost hasn't yet broken, one can hear a soft, rhythmic hum. 3 pulses. Then silence. Then, from nowhere in particular. We did not burn her. We let her through. The ruins of the Red House were never fully excavated. In the weeks following the collapse, county officials arrived in Wexley to survey the damage. Their report, filed under case reference, number 1858WEXR2, concluded the incident as a structural implosion likely caused by soil instability and outdated heating infrastructure. It recommended that no further efforts be made to reclaim or rebuild the site. The crater was filled with chalk and lime by March of that year. A wooden fence was erected, later replaced with rusted iron. No plaque, no marker, not even a warning sign. The land was deemed dead ground. And yet, the deaths did not end there. In the decade that followed, several individuals connected, even distantly, to the clinic met curious ends. Dr. Abner Clem, who had signed the falsified death certificate for Miriam Howarth, was found in his Newcastle study in 1862, his body partially calcified from the inside. A fire had not occurred, nor had any heat source malfunctioned. His wife, still alive at the time, testified that his skin had turned to stone while he was reading. The book found open on his desk was an anatomy text, its margins annotated in unfamiliar handwriting. The ink was faintly warm. In 1864, a travelling photographer named Ernest Tolbury attempted to capture the overgrown ruins for a regional journal piece on forgotten medical facilities of the North. He exposed 3 plates before his camera jammed. The images, developed weeks later in York, each bore the same impossible detail. Though Talbury stood alone that morning, a second figure appeared in every image, standing motionless in the field behind him, partially translucent, arms raised. The face was blank. The body seemed skeletal, but not fully formed. Heat distortion blurred the figure's outline, though the grass and trees remained sharp. Each of the 3 glass plates cracked upon handling. One technician reported a burn on his fingertips. By 1870, the name Wexley had become a subject of mockery among younger townsfolk, something whispered only in superstitious tones. But the older generation, those who had smelled the air that morning or watched the chimney glow, refused to walk the southern road. Children were forbidden from playing near the fence, and during storms, locals claimed to see steam rise from the ground where the house had once stood. Mrs. Ida Prynne, who kept journals her entire life, recorded this entry on January 14th, 1873. The wind stood still this morning. I went to boil tea, but the kettle sang before the flame was lit. The chimney, what's left of it, was damp, but warm, and I swear I heard tapping faintly under the earth. As though something were checking the lid, no scientific expedition has ever been able to explain the lingering thermal fluctuations in the soil beneath the site. In 1910, a group from Durham University's Department of Geological Studies installed a temperature probe during a regional survey. Though the outside air was 2 degrees Celsius, the soil 30 inches deep measured 44.9 degrees Celsius. The probe melted on the 3rd reading. The report was never published. The story might have faded entirely into rural myth, if not for the efforts of one man. Arthur Felgrave, a historian and folklorist, began investigating the Wexley incident in 1924, after finding a scorched envelope filed incorrectly in a Norwich parish archive. It contained a single sheet, a facsimile of Dr. Wexley's handwriting. It read, "The body, properly refined, becomes not fuel, but signal. That is our error. We thought we were burning matter, but we were igniting message." Felgrave spent the next 17 years compiling testimonies, blueprints, and personal diaries. He travelled across counties, interviewed remaining descendants, and unearthed dozens of unreleased documents. His manuscript, Flame Without Smoke, The True Account of the Wexley Clinic, was completed in 1942. He died before it was published, burned in his own study. Only the steel hinges of his writing desk survived. The manuscript, recovered from the ash, was warm to the touch. The chimney remains. Surrounded by tall grass and a crooked iron fence, its red bricks faded to near grey with time. Though erosion has weathered its upper rim, the base is untouched. Moss grows on all sides, except the southeastern face, which remains bone-dry year-round. In 1966, a meteorological student named Rita Bambridge spent a night documenting air differentials in abandoned spaces across Northshire. She set a thermometer 20 feet from the chimney, then another at 5 feet. At precisely 3:14 a.m., the closer device registered a spike to 47.2 degrees Celsius. There was no wind, no moon, just heat. And, as she later wrote, a voice. Not audible, but felt. Like pressure through the bones of the jaw. It said nothing I could write, but it asked a question. I just don't know what it was. She never returned to the site. Her field notes, now held in the Northshire Weather Archives, end with a single line. It doesn't want worship, it wants memory. So what remains? There are no official plaques, no museum collections, no guided tours or ghost walks, only a missing building, a handful of documents sealed in private archives, and a growing list of scorched footnotes in the margins of medical history. And yet, every few years, a new report surfaces. A furnace failure in Barrowfell with no combustion trace. A student in Durham who sketches spiral diagrams in her sleep. A voice recorder left running in the Wexley field that captures nothing for 2 hours, then suddenly heats up to melt the tape. No one speaks of Dr. Wexley anymore, but the phrase that echoes again and again through these fragments, scribbled on walls, scratched into stone, etched into metal, is the same. She sang. Final line. And still, every January, Just before the frost breaks, the chimney exhales once and remembers her name.